Very good afternoon to everyone. Welcome back to the series of webinars that McGraw Hill is organizing on international relations. Today we are here with the webinar number 4, and the topic for the discussion is a very important topic, which is about the India and Pakistan and the issues related to terrorism that arise out of the two states. We'll have a quick discussion about what the topic is, and obviously we'll discuss the various dynamics involved between India and Pakistan. At the end of the discussion, there will be a question answer session. So please keep your questions ready and please make sure that your questions are related to the topic that we have discussed. So without wasting much time, let's start now. In order to understand basically the use of terrorism as a tool by Pakistan, we have to basically go back to the history and have certain lessons from the past. And when it comes to the past, we have to first understand the most important issue over which the terrorism policy of Pakistan has begun. And that issue has been basically with respect to the territory called Kashmir. Now, the basics related to the Kashmir issue are known to most of you. That Kashmir basically earlier under the control of the British came in 1845 after the Treaty of Amritsar was signed. Basically after the fall of the Sikh Empire, when the Sikh Empire was crushed by the British and collapsed after the death of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, who was the ruler of the Sikh Empire. At that time, the Britishers basically signed the Treaty of Amritsar. And Treaty of Amritsar was signed by one of the descendants of the rulers of Hari Singh, of basically Maharaja Ranjit Singh only. And that person at that time was basically responsible for signing the Treaty of Amritsar. And his name was Gulab Singh. So Gulab Singh basically signed a Treaty of Amritsar with the British, and as a result of which began the Dogra rule in Kashmir. The Dogra rule continued, and at the time of 1940s, the most important Dogra ruler at that time of Kashmir was basically a person by the name of Hari Singh. You see, Hari Singh basically was a person who was ruling over Kashmir, which had a very different kind of a population. The Jammu region in Kashmir prior to India's independence was an area where we had a Muslim majority. After the partition, obviously a lot of Muslims from the Jammu area went away to Pakistan, and as a result of which it became a Hindu majority area. But before partition, the Jammu area was basically a Muslim majority area. The other area was the Kashmir Valley, which was again under the control of Hari Singh, which was a purely predominantly Muslim dominated area again. The third area, which was the third part of Kashmir, was basically the Ladakh territory, which was again under the rulership of Hari Singh. And Ladakh territory was under the majority of the Buddhists. The fourth and the fifth area, which was under the Kashmir, under the rulership of Hari Singh, was the Gilgit-Baltistan territory. Gilgit territory, Baltistan territory, both were again basically Muslim majority areas, but please remember very carefully that the Muslims living in Gilgit-Baltistan at that time were basically Ismaili Shias. And the rest of the Muslims that we just talked about, whether the Muslims that were there in the Jammu region or whether the Muslims that were there even in the Kashmir Valley region, they were basically Sunnis. So, what I am trying to tell you is a very important thing, that Kashmir was an amalgamation of multiple religious groups when Hari Singh was the ruler prior to India's independence. We had Hindus who were living in Jammu, but they were in a minority, considering that at that time pre-partition scenario was that Muslims were there who were in a majority in the Jammu region. They were Sunni Muslims. Ladakh had basically the Buddhists. Gilgit-Baltistan had Ismaili Shias, and the Kashmir Valley had Sunni Muslims again. Now, the problem is that at the time of India's independence, as you are aware, that the Britishers gave an option to the princely states to either join India or join the dominion of Pakistan or remain independent. And this option was given to even one of the princely states which was under the rulership of Hari Singh, that was Kashmir. Hari Singh basically was in a dilemma. The dilemma was that, he never wanted to join India because he thought that if he joins Indian dominion, then Nehru would strip Hari Singh of all his powers and eventually apply the Indian constitution in Kashmir, and as a result of which Hari Singh thought that he would lose all the powers, etc. Hari Singh was also not in favor of joining a Muslim majority Pakistan because he was of the opinion that he is a Hindu ruler and being a Hindu ruler, if he joins Pakistan, then in that case, obviously, the Muslim majority Pakistan would try to strip away Hari Singh of all his powers again. But one thing that Hari Singh was very confused about was that he definitely knew that at least India would not trouble Hari Singh, whereas a Muslim majority Pakistan would definitely try to trouble Hari Singh. That is the reason why, after independence in 1947, Hari Singh went on to sign a standstill agreement, which was one of the agreements proposed by the British. He signed the standstill agreement basically with Pakistan. His objective of signing the standstill agreement with Pakistan was to ensure that Pakistan does not attack Kashmir or invade Kashmir. But somehow that did not happen. Now, after India and Pakistan also became independent, as Hari Singh was indecisive and he was not in a position to take a decision that whether he should join India or whether he should join Pakistan, but favored independence. This independence policy of Hari Singh was neither accepted by India nor accepted by Pakistan. So what happened at that time was that, after India and Pakistan got partitioned in August, in the month of September 1947, around 60,000 war veterans who had participated with the British Indian Army in the World War II in different theaters of the world, who were basically Indian Muslims, they came back to Kashmir. They came back to Kashmir because they belonged to the Poonch area of Kashmir. The Poonch area is in the western Jammu region. 60,000 of these war veterans came back. Most of these 60,000 war veterans were Muslims. When they came back in September 1947 to Kashmir in the Poonch area where they were living, they got very frustrated there. Their frustration was that, Hari Singh is a Hindu ruler and we are now subjects of a Hindu ruler. The frustration also increased because that was the time period when the entire country was going through a communal riot. Communal riot was manifesting more just below Kashmir in Punjab in a more aggressive way. Hari Singh, on top of that, in the month of September 1947, started imposing a lot of taxes upon the people of Kashmir. And the people of Kashmir began to resent these taxes. When the people of Kashmir resented these taxes, the 60,000 war veterans who had come back from various theaters of the World War II also resented these taxes. Now, when people resented these taxes that Hari Singh imposed, the result was that Hari Singh had to use force. He used his Hindu Dogra army to suppress these people who were protesting, and most of the protesters were Muslims. And as most of the protesters who were Muslims were suppressed by Hari Singh, what happened is that these protests happened even in Poonch area, where these 60,000 war veterans were there. And these war veterans were also suppressed. When Hari Singh suppressed these war veterans, now what happened is that these 60,000 war veterans immediately decided to cross over to Pakistan to take their help, to get Kashmir liberated from basically the Hindu ruler called Hari Singh. Now the moment these majority of the Poonch residents who were basically the war veterans crossed over, in Pakistan they were basically greeted by one of the army officers of Pakistan, who at that time was basically Major Akbar Khan. Major Akbar Khan basically decided to use these war veterans who are already trained in warfare to carry out an irregular war, or carry out an irregular war against Hari Singh in Kashmir. So what happened is that the moment these war veterans went to Pakistan, Major Akbar Khan of the Pakistani army mobilized them, gave them training, provided them with basic weapons, the weapons which were used by the Pakistani army only, and trained these people to cross over to Kashmir and wage a jihad against Hari Singh at that time. These war veterans, already trained in warfare, received more training in the acts of sabotage and subversion, and they crossed over in the month of October. And the moment they crossed over in the month of October 1947, they started basically looting the households, raping the women, taking away their possessions, and also started occupying the territory by killing the people. And as these people who were basically nothing but irregular forces trained by Pakistan started occupying the territories. And as they kept on reaching further and further in Kashmir, they were on the outskirts of Srinagar. Now, when they were on the outskirts of Srinagar, this upsetted Hari Singh at that time, and he was very concerned to protect Srinagar. To protect the fall of Srinagar, he requested India for help. When he asked Nehru for help, Nehru refused. Nehru said, no, we cannot help you. We cannot help you because you are not formally a part of India. So, under this compulsion, what happened is that in order to protect Srinagar from falling into the hands of these irregulars, Hari Singh decided to sign the instrument of accession with India. When he signed the instrument of accession with India, Indian troops immediately went to Kashmir, resisted these Pakistani irregulars, reoccupied some of the territories. But as you are aware that the matter reached the United Nations, there was a ceasefire eventually. And after that eventual ceasefire, one thing became very clear. That when the ceasefire finally came, the problem was that a part of Kashmir was already occupied by Pakistan. And a part of Kashmir was left with India. As 3/5 of Kashmir was already occupied by Pakistan and the balance with India, Pakistan understood one thing very clearly. They understood that the best way to occupy territory from India is not to use the army, but to use an irregular force. And such an irregular force can basically help us in territorial acquisition. So you see, this particular incident that happened in 1947-48, which is also today known as the first war between India-Pakistan or the 1947-48 war, is a war where Pakistan understood one very important thing, that use of irregular troops is always a beneficial idea over and above the regular troops. And this gave Pakistan tremendous confidence in using the irregulars. As the time progressed, we know one thing, that in 1962 India and China had a conflict. In that conflict, unfortunately, India was badly defeated at the hands of the Chinese. After the defeat of India at the hand of the Chinese in the conflict, followed by that, one thing now became very clear, that Nehru also was in a deep dilemma. And in 1964, eventually Nehru also died. And after the death of Nehru, when Shastri succeeded as the Prime Minister, Pakistan at that time was of this opinion that Shastri is a weak leader. Pakistan also was of the opinion that Indian army has not been able to retaliate to Chinese in 1962, so therefore the Indian army is a weak army. These two factors motivated Pakistan to basically trouble India again. And in order to trouble India again, what Pakistan did was that in the year of 1964, Pakistan created something called Master Cell. The creation of Master Cell by Pakistan was primarily with the objective to incite the people of Kashmir to carry out the acts of sabotage and subversion in Kashmir. You see, one very important thing that you have to keep in mind, as I told you earlier, is that even in 1947-48, the war veterans who were Poonch citizens of Poonch of Jammu were used by Pakistan as irregulars. Creation of Master Cell in 1964 as an object to carry out subversion and sabotage also included the Kashmiri citizens only. So under the Master Cell, the ISI of Pakistan at that time decided to train the Kashmiri people to undertake a rebellion. And they thought that once a rebellion happens in Kashmir by the Kashmiri people themselves, we will be able to further incite the rebellion by supporting the people who are doing the rebellion to create a war situation for India. And already they had the perception that Indian army is weak, and they had the perception that, Shastri is a weak ruler. So all these factors combined together, that is their perception of Shastri as a weak ruler, their perception of Indian army being a weak army, plus their perception that through master cell, we will be able to incite the Kashmiri people and thereby use the rebellion to undertake a war with India and liberate Kashmir from India, combined together to create the 1965 war. Now, obviously, in 1965 war, India gave a befitting response to Pakistan. And when India gave a befitting response to Pakistan, one thing became very clear, that Pakistan realized again that we have not been able to succeed. So what happened is that the master cell was now replaced by Pakistan with a new organization that they created, a covert organization called Al-Fatah. Al-Fatah was basically again an organization where Pakistan tried to incite the Kashmiri people, use the Kashmiri people for the purpose of basically creating sabotage and subversion. But after 1965 war, as India also realized that these Pakistanis are carrying out acts of subversion and sabotage, India decided to do the counter retaliation for the same. And as a result of which, in 1968, the Research and Analysis Wing, or the RAW, was born. The RAW basically used the same strategies that Pakistan had been using till now. And using the same strategies, we created the same acts of sabotage and subversion in East Pakistan. And the success of this act of sabotage and subversion in East Pakistan led to the birth of Bangladesh in 1971. So you see, one thing became very clear. The decade of 1960s till the year of 1971 is an act of sabotage and subversion by both states. While Pakistan was using Master Cell and Al-Fatah to carry out acts of subversion and sabotage against India, after 1968, the birth of RAW, India did the same acts in the East Pakistani territory, and the success of the India's acts of sabotage and subversion was the birth of Bangladesh. So in 1971, when Pakistan lost Bangladesh, or their East Pakistan, one thing now became very clear to Pakistan. Pakistan understood one thing, that India has conventional military superiority. And as they understood that India has conventional military superiority, Pakistan also understood one thing, that we cannot conventionally ever win a war with India. And if we cannot conventionally ever win a war with India, then we have to continue to sponsor terrorism into India. And we have to resort to state sponsorship of terrorism. You see, when we look at the concept of state sponsorship of terrorism, let us say there are two states, A and B. Let's say state A fights a war with state B. And state A, when it fights a war with state B, let's assume that the state B defeats the state A in the war. When the state A is defeated, not just once or twice but many times, the state A understands one thing. It understands that the state B possesses conventional military superiority. And because it possesses conventional military superiority, it gives up the ambition to fight a direct war with B. But it does not give up an ambition to fight per se. You see, this is a very important thing that I am trying to tell you. State A has been defeated many times by state B. And if the state A has been defeated many times by the state B, state A understands one thing, that I can never win a direct war with B. So I will not fight a direct war. But if I will not fight a direct war, I do not give up the ambition to fight. I will still fight, but I will fight an indirect war. So state A now decides to fight an indirect war with B. And when the state A takes a decision to fight an indirect war with B, this indirect war happens through use of proxy groups, the PGs. The proxy groups are created by state A. The proxy groups are created by state A in the territory of the state B. These proxy groups in the territory of the state B also create two further things. That is front organizations, FOs, and OGWs, that are overground workers. So proxy groups create front organizations and overground workers. Front organizations which are created by the proxy groups are basically used for the purpose of radicalization and indoctrination. So front organizations have a very clear-cut objective. that on the ground they are used for the purpose of radicalization and indoctrination of people in the territory of the state B. These front organizations also, once they radicalize the people and indoctrinate the people, these people are then fed into the proxy groups. That is why we say that the front organizations are feeder to the proxy groups. Please understand the theory right now, because we are going to soon replace the entire theory with the practice of an example, and then you'll understand everything very clearly if the concept here is clear. So front organizations act as feeders to the proxy groups. And then we have the overground workers. The overground workers are also created by the proxy groups only. And overground workers are basically citizens of the state B who do not want to undertake direct terrorism as of now, but want to support the terrorist group. And as they want to support the terrorist group, these overground workers also support in radicalization purposes. They also support in providing logistical support to the terrorist groups for their activity. And at a later stage, these overground workers also help in carrying out the terrorist strikes. So again, I repeat one thing very clearly, that the state A, which has lost many wars from the state B, has decided not to fight a direct war with B, but has decided to fight an indirect war. It has decided to fight an indirect war because it knows that the state B has conventional military superiority, and if it fights with the state B at a military level, it will be defeated. So therefore, it goes for an indirect war. In this indirect war, the state A creates proxy groups. Proxy groups are created by the state A in the territory of the state B. In the territory of the state B, again, these proxy groups now create front organizations, and they create overground workers. While the front organizations are used for radicalization, indoctrination, and once the people are radicalized and indoctrinated, they are fed into the proxy groups to undertake proxy war. Whereas the overground workers are used for logistics, radicalization, and at a later stage for terrorist strikes. A combination of front organizations, overground workers, and proxy groups constitutes what is called as a CTI, which is called a competitive terrorism industry. So please remember one thing, that whenever a state which intends to undertake an indirect war or intends to fight a proxy war with another state, such a state will always create a competitive terrorism industry or a CTI. The defeated state here is the state A. And that defeated state does what? As I said, they use proxy groups. Proxy groups create the FOs and OGWs. FOs, OGWs plus the PGs, all the three combine to create a competitive terrorism industry CTI. Keep this in mind. Pakistan, if we observe one thing, is a state that has fought many wars with India. Pakistan is a state that has fought a first war in 1947-48. As we just said, that in that first war of 1947-48, Pakistan basically used irregulars. And those irregulars were basically the war veterans from Poonch in West Jammu region of Pakistan, of India at that time, who went over to Pakistan. That use of irregulars at that time gave confidence to Pakistan that through the use of irregulars we have been able to carry out territorial acquisition of Kashmir. So Pakistan developed a strategy in their mind that, irregulars, if they have helped us in 1947 to acquire territory, these irregulars can help us to acquire territory forever. Pakistan then again, as I explained, fought another war in 1965. The prelude to the 1965 was the defeat of India in 1962. Prelude was also a perception of the Pakistanis that Indian army is weak and won't be able to retaliate. And also the creation of Master Cell as a covert organization by Pakistan in the territory of Kashmir to carry out, the acts of sabotage and subversion. After 1965 war, when Pakistan got a befitting response, Pakistan created Al-Fatah as a covert organization to continue the acts of sabotage subversion in Kashmir. The creation of Al-Fatah was again countered by India when India in 1968 created the RAW, and the RAW carried out counter sabotage, counter subversion. And in 1971, Pakistan eventually lost their territory and was defeated again. You see, after these three wars with India, Pakistan understood one thing, that we cannot fight a direct war with India. After 1971 war, Pakistan decided to continue to fight with India but fight at an indirect level. 1970s also was a time period when certain situations happened in Afghanistan. I have explained about Afghanistan earlier in the previous webinars that we have had. Let us have a quick glimpse of the same here again to fill the chronology also. In the 1970s, the ruler of Afghanistan was a person by the name of King Zahir Khan. Zahir Khan was the monarch. In 1970s, his own cousin, Muhammad Daud, he basically removed Zahir Khan and acquired power in Afghanistan. Muhammad Daud, who now became the ruler of Afghanistan, was basically a person who was very anti-Pakistan. And he was also very anti-Islamists in Afghanistan, primarily because he was a very secular ruler. And not only he was a secular ruler, but Muhammad Daud also tried to implement Soviet-style reforms in Afghanistan. So you see, two things are happening. Muhammad Daud has removed Zahir Khan. He has started adopting a secular rule. He is anti-Pakistan, anti-Islamist. And he is undertaking the implementation of the agenda of basically Soviet Union. Now, 1971, Pakistan also lost the territory of East Pakistan. On top of that, when Muhammad Daud came to Afghanistan, he started saying that I will take away Baluchistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa back from Pakistan. And in the previous webinar, if you remember, I have already explained you when we talked about the Durand Line issue, that what issue between Afghanistan and Pakistan exists and why Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Baluchistan matter for Afghanistan. As we have already explained that, we don't need to go into it. Muhammad Daud started making statements. He started saying that, I will take away Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, I will take away Baluchistan from Pakistan. Pakistan had already lost a territory in 1971 in the case of East Pakistan, so Pakistan became very concerned. They thought that if Muhammad Daud succeeds in doing what he is trying to say, then in that case what will happen is there will be further vivisection of the territory of Pakistan. So to prevent the further vivisection of the territory of Pakistan, what the Pakistani did was that in 1974 they created a covert cell called the Afghan Cell. The objective of this covert Afghan cell created by Pakistani ISI was to support Islamists in Afghanistan. The idea of Pakistani ISI was that, as I just told you that, Daud was basically anti-Islamists. So Pakistan decided to basically use the Islamists only. So what Pakistan tried to do is that under the covert Afghan cell that they created in 1974, they basically started supporting Islamists in Afghanistan. And if you remember in the previous webinar, I told you that in 1975, Pakistan created Jamaat-e-Islami in Afghanistan also. The Jamaat-e-Islami was created under the leadership of Burhanuddin Rabbani and Gulubuddin Hikmatyar, the two important assets of the Pakistanis. So Jamaat-e-Islami was a party that they created with the objective of countering Muhammad Daud. And don't forget the fact that these people who were a part of Jamaat-e-Islami were also used by Pakistan to protect their territorial integrity of Baluchistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So one thing now became very clear, that basically at that time in Afghanistan the situation became volatile. Pakistan was supporting the Islamists. They created a Islamist militant structure there. But as Muhammad Daud continued to implement the Soviet agenda over a period of time, now what happened is that Soviet realized that even Muhammad Daud may not succeed because Pakistan is interfering. And to prevent this interference of Pakistan, in 1979, Soviet invaded Afghanistan. Now, when Soviet invaded Afghanistan, we also know, as we have discussed in the previous webinar, which we will not go into detail again, that after Soviet invaded Afghanistan, the Americans and the Saudi Arabians joined hands with the Pakistanis to create a Mujahideen campaign. Till 1988, the Mujahideens kept on fighting. In 1988, there was a Geneva Accord, and after the Geneva Accord, when the Mujahideens were able to basically defeat the Soviet, and the Soviet decided to withdraw, in 1988, many of these Mujahideens came back to Pakistan. Now, when these Mujahideens came back to Pakistan, Pakistan realized that we cannot allow these Mujahideens to be here in our territory because these Mujahideens will trouble us. So, Pakistan decided to use these Afghan Mujahideens now to wage a war in Kashmir. And that is why in 1989, Pakistan, basically the ISI, supported these Afghan Mujahideens who came back under a group called Markaz-ud-Dawa wal-Irshad. So in 1989, this organization called Markaz-ud-Dawa wal-Irshad was created. Most of the Afghan Mujahideen who came back from the theater of Afghanistan were channelized into this. The Markaz-ud-Dawa basically now created an armed wing in 1989 called the Lashkar-e-Taiba. Lashkar-e-Taiba literally means army of the pure. Lashkar means army, Taiba means pure. So Lashkar-e-Taiba means army of the pure. So in 1989, this armed wing of Markaz was now basically used by Pakistan to wage a war in Kashmir. And as we have seen that Pakistan had already realized one thing, that I cannot fight conventional war with India. I have to fight an indirect war through state sponsorship. So 1988-89 was an adequate time period for Pakistan to do that. Because the Afghan Mujahideen came back and all that they had to do is to channelize them from Afghanistan to the theater of Kashmir. So Lashkar-e-Taiba got created. From 1992 to 1994, Pakistan also created an organization called United Jihad Council. This United Jihad Council was basically an umbrella organization of multiple jihadi groups. These jihadi groups included groups like HM, that is Hizbul Mujahideen, AUM, that is Al-Umar Mujahideen, HUA, that is Harkatul Ansar, AT, that is Allah Tigers, ALB stands for Al Badr, and HJC stands for Hurriyat Jamaat Conference. So basically what Pakistan did was that they created multiple terrorist groups. And these multiple terrorist groups that they created brought them together under an umbrella called United Jihad Council. The reason of creating multiple terrorist groups was that these multiple terrorist groups were given different areas of Kashmir to fight. While Hizbul Mujahideen was sent to South Kashmir, Al-Umar Mujahideen, Harkatul Ansar were basically told to fight in North Kashmir. Allah Tigers was told to fight in Central Kashmir. Al-Badr and Hurriyat Jamaat Conference was basically encouraged to support these organizations. So Pakistan basically created a competitive terrorism industry. This competitive terrorism industry enabled Pakistan to undertake massive level of jihad in Kashmir in the 1990s. You see, there are two things here to remember. The jihad in Kashmir in 1990s is not the first time that we witnessed jihad. Jihad has happened earlier also through the Master Cell, even through Al-Fatah, and even prior to Master Cell and Al-Fatah through those war veterans of Poonch. So number one, jihad is not something that came in 1990s. Number two, this jihad that came in 1990s became more intense than the previous phases of jihad because of the Afghan issue. Because when the Afghan issue ended in 1988-89, the Afghan Mujahideen were channelized by the Pakistanis to wage a jihad in Kashmir. So what we are trying to say is that the jihad continued. The only thing that was different in 1990s of the jihad in Kashmir by Pakistan was that the intensity was higher. Intensity was higher because of the Afghan Mujahideen playing an important role in the Kashmir theater. As the time progressed, now what happened is that in 1999, Pakistan also, in connivance with Al-Qaeda, hijacked the IC-814 aircraft, which was basically an aircraft that was to fly from Kathmandu to Delhi. That aircraft was hijacked from Nepal. It was taken to Kandahar. In the previous webinar, I have explained you that why Taliban was not involved in the IC-814 and why that was only a Pakistani narrative. But Pakistan basically hijacked the IC-814 and they got released certain terrorists in return. One of the terrorists who got released in return was basically Maulana Masood Azhar. He was a Deobandi terrorist. He was released. Now, after his release, he was basically used by Pakistan to create another group, and that group was created in the year 2000, and that group was called the Jaish-e-Mohammed. ISI basically created an entire competitive terrorism industry from 1989 onwards till now. So it started with Markaz-ud-Dawa's armed wing called Lashkar. Then came the United Jihad Council in 1992 to 94. And then finally came in the year 2000 Jaish-e-Mohammed as a group after the release of Maulana Masood Azhar, who was supported by the ISI. Now all these groups, starting from Lashkar till Jaish-e-Mohammed, they did what? They carried out violence in Kashmir. Now Markaz-ud-Dawa, United Jihad Council, which included all those terrorist groups that we just saw, and Jaish-e-Mohammed carried out violence in Kashmir by doing terrorism in Kashmir. Now, when this violence happened, how did India respond? India developed a counter-terrorism strategy. What was the counter-terrorism strategy of India? It was an amalgamation of diplomatic and security component. The security component of our strategy was that India decided to carry out counter-terrorism operations, CTOs. These counter-terrorism operations carried out by India against these terrorists included 4 important agencies. The first was military intelligence. The military intelligence of India, or the MI, was basically used to infiltrate inside these terrorist groups to get to know about them. The military intelligence was basically supported by the IB, that is Intelligence Bureau, in this endeavor. So IB played a very important counter-terrorism role along with military intelligence. Jammu and Kashmir Police, or the JKP, was very importantly used along with the NSG, that are National Security Guards. So NSG and the Jammu and Kashmir Police, with the intelligence inputs from the MI and the IB, carried out counter-terrorism operations against these terrorists. Now, in these counter-terrorism operations, these agencies would, number one, obviously try their level best to kill the terrorists. But sometimes, these agencies also, instead of killing the terrorists, had succeeded in arresting them. When we arrested these terrorists, and we arrested a lot of them, for example, we even arrested, for that matter, Maulana Masood Azhar. That is why he was released in one of the swap deals only. Even Maulana Masood Azhar, when he was arrested, he was interrogated. The interrogation at that time proved the strategy adopted by Pakistan. The interrogation at that time basically helped us to analyze the competitive terrorism industry that Pakistan had created. So as a result of which, one thing now became very clear, that India interrogated these terrorists, got to know about their strategy. And when India got to know about their strategy, India now diplomatically used these particular interrogation points to counter Pakistan. So diplomatically, we began to tell everybody in the world that, see, Pakistan is sending terrorists. It is a state sponsorship of terrorism. It is sponsoring terrorism in Kashmir. And it is a regional destabilizer. So this strategy that India adopted, the counter-terrorism strategy, was a mixture of security component and diplomatic component. Information for the diplomatic component came from security operations when we interrogated the terrorists. And diplomatically, India created a narrative that Pakistan is a state sponsor of terrorism and it is a regional destabilizer. So as a result and a consequence of this strategy of India, Pakistan witnessed international isolation. Now when Pakistan witnessed international isolation, one thing became very clear, that Pakistan became very concerned that, you see, this strategy is backfiring on us. This strategy where we are sending a terrorist of, Pakistan to Kashmir to fight is being caught by India. India is interrogating that fellow and using that narrative against us. So Pakistan decided to change the strategy. Now what happened is that in 2002, after witnessing a lot of international isolation, Pakistan basically created Jamaat-ud-Dawa. Jamaat-ud-Dawa was created as a political wing of Markaz-ud-Dawa. If you try to recollect, as I have told you earlier, Markaz-ud-Dawa's armed wing was called Lashkar-e-Taiba. Markaz-ud-Dawa's political wing created in 2002 was called Jamaat-ud-Dawa. So Markaz-ud-Dawa created an armed wing called Lashkar in 1989. They created a political wing called Jamaat-ud-Dawa in 2002. Now Jamaat-ud-Dawa was basically told to create proxy groups and front organizations in India. Jamaat-ud-Dawa created a front organization in India called SIMI. SIMI stands for Student Islamic Movement of India. The Student Islamic Movement of India began to create multiple trusts in India. These trusts were ironically humanitarian trusts. They basically were created in a very disguised manner. They existed more as educational institutes, charitable hospitals, etc. So Student Islamic Movement of India or SIMI created multiple trusts in India. These trusts enabled SIMI to get access to Indian Muslims. These Indian Muslims who basically came to these educational humanitarian trusts which were micromanaged by SIMI, these Indian Muslims, when they came to these kind of trusts, they got radicalized here. And when they got radicalized here, these radicalized Muslims in India were now used by SIMI to provide them into another group which the ISI created in 2005, which was called Indian Mujahideen or IM. So you see, after receiving diplomatic backlash from the international community, Pakistan adopted a completely new strategy. The new strategy was now to radicalize Indian Muslims and use the Indian Muslims to carry out terrorism in India. And this entire strategy was micromanaged by the ISI of Pakistan from the city of Karachi. And that is why this was known as the Karachi Project. So in the city of Karachi, Markaz-ud-Dawa in 2002 created a political wing called Jamaat-ud-Dawa. Jamaat-ud-Dawa was told to create proxy groups and front organizations in India. One of the proxy groups Jamaat-ud-Dawa created was basically called SIMI, that is Student Islamic Movement of India. The Student Islamic Movement of India created multiple trusts. Most of these trusts were educational trusts, humanitarian trusts, charitable hospitals, etc. These trusts enabled the SIMI to get access to Indian Muslims. And when Indian Muslims came to these trusts, whether for education, whether for any humanitarian assistance, or whether for any medical support, the SIMI used these Indian Muslims who came there to radicalize them. Once these Indian Muslims were radicalized, they were basically used by SIMI and fed into a group that was created in 2005 called Indian Mujahideen. So Indian Mujahideen basically got members who were radicalized by SIMI. So that is why SIMI became a feeder to the Indian Mujahideen. And what is Indian Mujahideen now trying to do? Indian Mujahideen basically now tries to radicalize the Indian Muslims and tries to use them to carry out terrorist strikes in India. So one thing is very clear, that over a period of time, Pakistani strategy has today changed. The new Pakistani strategy today is to use Indian Mujahideen to target India. The Pakistani strategy today is that they at one place want to continue to fight in Kashmir. In Kashmir, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Hizbul Mujahideen continue to remain the two dominant groups. On top of that, Pakistan has moved away from Kashmir and has gone today to the rest of India. And in rest of India, the terrorism is done by Pakistan, not by the Pakistani people. The beauty is that Pakistan today radicalizes Indian Muslims and uses Indian Muslims to do terrorism in India. So the gain for Pakistan by doing this is that Pakistan is able to create a narrative all over the world. And Pakistan is able to today tell everybody in the world that, see, we are not sponsoring terrorism in India. And they are saying that if terrorism happens in India, it is done by Indian Mujahideen. And Indian Mujahideen is basically a group which has Indian Muslims. And if Indian Muslims are doing terrorism in India, the Pakistanis are able to create this narrative that Indian Muslims are alienated sections of the society. And these alienated sections of the society are carrying out terrorist strikes in India. So one thing is very clear, sir, that the overall strategy now adopted by Pakistan is that Pakistan tries to do terrorism in Kashmir through Hizbul Mujahideen and Lashkar-e-Taiba majorly. On top of that, Indian Mujahideen Simmi, under the overall leadership of Jamaat Dawa, carry out terrorism in the entire Indian territory. And as a result of which, today India has to confront Pakistan at multiple fronts. So we have to confront Pakistan in Kashmir, where our security forces continue to do counter-terrorism operations. We also have to basically confront Pakistan at the rest of India level. And at the rest of India level, we have to confront them basically in tackling the radicalization of the Indian Muslims. So one thing is very clear, sir, that in order to counter Pakistani new strategy of terrorism, India has to adopt a very careful strategy. Firstly, the security-centric operations should continue as they are going on in Kashmir. Security-centric operations against Indian Mujahideen should also continue as they are going on in Pan-India. Number two, India has to take a lot of steps to prevent radicalization of Indian Muslims. And to prevent radicalization of Indian Muslims, the mainstreaming of the Muslim community is going to be a key strategy. Any activity by the government that basically leads to alienation of the Muslims is only going to be taught as an advantage by Pakistan. Because any strategy of alienation of Indian Muslims is going to be used by Pakistan to further radicalize them against India. So the overall strategy of India in future to tackle the threat of terrorism from Pakistan is very importantly based upon not only security centric operations, but very importantly on mainstreaming Indian Muslims and very importantly preventing their alienation at all costs. So I hope you have been able to get a lot of clarity about the terrorism strategy adopted by Pakistan and why it has been able to succeed. Now let us have a question answer session and let me try to answer your questions which are there. You see, there is this one question here that was the Dogra army trained by Pakistan? No, the answer is Dogra army was not trained by Pakistan. Dogra army was an army of Hari Singh. How can Dogra army be trained by Pakistan? Dogra army was never trained by Pakistan. Now there is another question that same policy of using irregular force for suppression is also done in Afghanistan, that is growth of Taliban. No, there is no such policy like this. In Afghanistan, the situation has been very different. In Afghanistan, there are no irregulars. In fact, the Afghanistan has an Afghan National Security Force that is being today used for the purpose of fighting. There is a question, what are proxy groups? Proxy groups are basically these irregular forces. All these irregular groups that have been created by Pakistan that primarily include Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Indian Mujahideen Simmi, these are called basically proxy groups. So these proxy groups are basically terrorist groups which are created. There is a question that please discuss the CTI again. See, CTI is a competitive terrorism industry. The meaning of competitive terrorism industry is a combination of proxy groups, front organizations and overground workers. So, as I said, any country which wants to undertake state sponsorship of terrorism, such a country will always create a competitive terrorism industry. And a competitive terrorism industry is an amalgamation of front organizations, proxy groups and overground workers. Al-Fatah and Master Cell. There is a question that is Al-Fatah and Master Cell the same? No, please don't confuse the two things. Master Cell was created before 1965 war. The objective obviously was to carry out subversion and sabotage. After the 1965 war and the failure of Pakistan to incite a rebellion in Kashmir and forcibly snatch it away, they created Al-Fatah. So Al-Fatah came after 1965 war. And Al-Fatah was also again for the same objective. So you can't say ki Master Cell and Al-Fatah are the same. What you can say is that the objectives of the two are same. but they were created at different time periods for the purpose of carrying out subversion and sabotage. So there is a question that will the Citizenship Amendment Act be used as an advantage by Pakistan? Yes, definitely. In fact, one of the Pakistani organizations that they have created in the recent times, called the Popular Front of India (PFI), is one of the groups that has been at the forefront in mobilizing the Indian Muslims against the CAA. So that can definitely be used. So there is this question that, was Lord Mountbatten involved in persuading Hari Singh to remain undecided? See, this is a conspiracy theory. There is no conclusive evidence available, written evidence or any kind of documented evidence for the same. Lord Mountbatten obviously wanted Kashmir to be with Pakistan rather than be with India, because Pakistan was willing to become a frontline state for the Americans and for the British. So Lord Mountbatten had more interest in having Kashmir remain not undecided but rather pro-Pakistan. But all these are conspiracy theories. The historians have not been able to prove anything. So don't get into all this. Now, there is a question that what steps have been taken by the government of India for the purpose of mainstreaming of the, Kashmir, the Indian Muslims. Unfortunately, the government does not publicize much of these steps, but, most of the times we happen to use the religious scholars of the Muslim community to undertake de-radicalization activity. And in most of the cases, the de-radicalization has been successful. Because you see, the fact of the matter is that even though Indian Muslims may remain susceptible for any kind of subversion sabotage by the ISI, but at the same time, the Indian Muslims today have more pro-India attitude rather than any other country as such. So we don't need to question or we don't need to challenge the nationalism of our Indian Muslims. They have always been with us and they will always be with us. As far as Article 370 and abrogation and its impact is concerned, as I told you in the previous webinar also, please read the India-Pakistan chapter carefully. There is a complete, detailed, deep analysis given there, where I have explained not only related to, the Article 370, but also the issues related to the Citizenship Amendment Act and the NRC and how they have impacted India's relationship with the neighborhood, including Pakistan and Bangladesh specifically. So there is a question that is India not well equipped to remove all SIMI? See, SIMI is basically a front organization. It is always very difficult to remove any front organization because they don't operate openly. So you may never know somebody who is a SIMI sympathizer. Just like, for example, in universities, you never know there are university professors who are RSS sympathizers. Only when you sit in a lecture and they start talking about that bullshit Hindutva that you get to know that, okay, this man is speaking venom. So, these kind of people are very difficult to identify. So it's not easy for that matter to, remove them or identify them. So there is a question, what is Markaz? Markaz ud Dawa wal Irshad is an organization which was created by the ISI of Pakistan. And that organization had a political wing called Jamaat ud Dawa that they created in 2002. They created an armed wing in 1989 called Lashkar-e-Taiba. So Markaz ud Dawa is basically an umbrella organization. And that umbrella organization, which basically has, your Lashkar and also your Jamaat ud Dawa. So there is a question, did separatists play an important role? Yes, there is a deep angle of the separatists. There is Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, and obviously they being used by the ISI of Pakistan to undertake even the exodus of the Kashmiri Pandits that happened in 1988 to 1990. That part of the history is basically something that you can read in the international relations book in the India-Pakistan chapter. I have explained everything there. So that is just a part of the chronology. There is a question that what is the difference between Shias and Sunnis? This difference is again given there in the book in the West Asia chapter. Please have a reading there. These are basic things that are expected out of, you, and you should be knowing all this. Yeah, so Markaz and Markazud Dawa are the same. Markaz is basically a short form that we use for the entire organization called Markazud Dawa wal Irshad. As far as Article 370 is concerned, many questions are related to that. I have already explained. Please read the Article 370 related analysis from the India-Pakistan chapter which is given in the book. Okay, there is a very important question I would like to answer this, that there is a question that why did plebiscite never happen in Kashmir? The plebiscite never happened in Kashmir because the condition for the plebiscite was basically violated. When UN Security Council Resolution 47 was passed by the United Nations at that time, the UN Security Council resolution very clearly told Pakistan to vacate completely their regular irregular forces in Kashmir. And they even allowed, as per the UN resolution, Security Council Resolution 47, they allowed India to maintain troops for defensive purpose. But the problem is that Pakistan never fully removed their regular irregular troops. And since then, India has been very clear with this, that till the time Pakistan does not remove their troops and maintain that condition for plebiscite, the plebiscite cannot happen. So India has not violated any condition for not having a plebiscite. In fact, it is Pakistan which is responsible for the same. There is this question that regarding IC-814, why Taliban supported hijacking. I have explained that even in the previous webinar. It's already explained in the India-Afghanistan chapter of the book also. Taliban has never supported any kind of hijacking of IC-814. It was an activity done by the ISI and Al-Qaeda together. So most of the questions are mostly repetitive, and I hope I have been able to answer most of your questions. So please go home and make sure now that you read the India-Pakistan chapter once again very carefully. We will have the next webinar next week now, and that webinar would be the last webinar. Please read the section 9 of the book before coming for that webinar, because a preconditioned knowledge of section 9 will definitely help you, because the next webinar which we are going to have on the issues related to nuclear terrorism is something that is going to be of a little difficult knowledge if you don't have the basic clarity. So please make sure that the section 9 of the International Relations book, third edition, is very carefully read by you. Thank you.